All right. Welcome to Thoughts on Talks, another Black Lives Matter episode conversation. We haven't really figured out what to call this, so that seems as good as any. And I am Malayna Dawn. I am here with Salaam Thompson and Rev Mike and Malayna. And we just want to keep the conversation going. And Rev Mike dancing and occasionally singing from what has blossomed really in our country, to put it in a positive way, blossomed. There's so much potential here if we can keep the focus and keep the conversation going and keep learning and sort of leaning into those uncomfortable places to make the world better for all of us. And Black lives are the focus now, because there is the house that is on fire in our country, and it's time to fix stuff that has gone on for, 450 years too long, something like that. So where should we start today? Let's start, Reverend Mike, the talk that you gave on Sunday. Was it September yet by then? No, it wasn't.
That was August 30th. It was the 30th.
Okay. Like I said, I like to think today's like August 33rd, because I don't want to move on to September yet. I'm not ready. Yeah. How does this happen? So your talk title on Sunday was what? I'm looking at your printed notes and I don't even see the title.
We are.
Oh, that's too easy.
Yes.
I thought you had sent me an email entitled "We Are," but hadn't finished the thought.
Yeah.
Joke's on me.
I think I even spoke to that, we are kind of begs a question depending on. All right. So we've gone through this whole month of exploring inclusivity in action. And of course, one more time, we have a young Black man who shot by police again. And then, you just see the disparities of, and then the young kid, clearly he was dumbass 17-year-old.
17.
But, it wasn't, I don't think it was lost on anyone that the cops saw a white kid with an assault rifle and just kind of went, "Hey, Junior, oh, good to have you here."
Yeah, Salaam, you posted a cartoon on your Facebook of, that encapsulated the incident. And I said, but a cartoon makes it look cute, and this is not.
It really
cute.
does. You're absolutely correct. And a lot of times, because I think that, not that I think that the cartoon was necessary, but a lot of times through humor and sarcasm, it kind of makes somewhat of a point, even though humor and sarcasm isn't the bedrock of the subject matter itself. But that's why you start seeing these cartoons. It's what made the New Yorker magazine famous. It's what made and how many caricatures have you seen? Muhammad Ali, even though the picture was in jest, but he had his hands bound behind his back, had rubber arrows that was at his torso. At the time he protested Vietnam. So a lot of times you'll see
there's the cartoon.
That's the cartoon right there, and and that literally is the nature of what our system is. You want to say criminal justice, but it's not just criminal justice. Well, then again, it's justice for criminals. So here's a guy, a young kid that just killed two people, and he's walking. And he's walking down the street with the rifle in his hand, saying, "Hey, I just killed some people." And then they were basically like giving him the matador treatment, like "Ole," they're taking him. Yeah. And then there was another video that I shared where there was he wasn't the only militia guy there, and it'd be naive for people to think that there's only one 17-year-old there with a rifle and a scope. I mean, there were other militia who were there, and the police opened up, they offered them water. I said, this is unheard of. It's really not, but just for the sake of discussion, it's unheard of that these are the guys who are militia. They weren't deputized, but the kindred spirit that they had with the police and the police had with them, that here, they'll offer you some water. Okay. But the protesters, are just, they're asked out pretty much. And so I read an article recently, and we're going to just to show you speak to the climate that happened in Kenosha. And Kenosha is just one small city, right? That's basically, it's an hour and a half north of Chicago. So it's not that far at all. And just to paint the picture, there was an article that I saw that according to reports from the FBI, that there were up to 36 street gangs in Chicago that basically said shoot every cop on sight. Usually the FBI is pretty good about issuing their reports. I haven't seen that report, so I'm still investigating it. That's why I kind of haven't shared it. At least I don't think I did. But I know the report that I do have a download of. I have the actual PDF report of FBI in October 2006. They released a report stating that they had an elevated concern of law enforcement agencies being infiltrated by white supremacist and white nationalist groups. And we're talking almost 15 years ago. And so look at how bad that it's gotten since then. I'll share the article it's a whole report. And every time I've shared it, when someone says there's no systemic racism, I always get crickets. I'm like, come on, man, keep the same energy with me now. You just said it wasn't a systemic racism, but here you have the leading crime fighting agency of the land that issued a concern about having white nationalists and white supremacists in its law enforcement agencies. And that's a problem. And another funny thing about, speaking of the FBI, while we're on that subject, is there are 18,000 police departments nationwide. This is 2020. Back in 2015, at that time, it was only 3% out of 18,000 police departments in the country that voluntarily submitted their use of force data. And the FBI didn't mandate it. I forgot who the fellow that either got fired or resigned. I think last year. So I forgot his name, but he was on this post at the time when this report was made known. And you got to think that, because I talk to conservatives, we thumb wrestling all the time, and so they'll come on and say, "Well, Salaam, there isn't any systemic racism because there are more white people who were killed by police than black." And I said, "Well, okay, let's say that I don't believe that for a second. I said, but let's say that you're correct. How are you basing that data if the FBI, the leading crime fighting agency, it cannot get more than 3% of the 18,000 police departments to submit their use of force data? So how did you, Mr. White Man, come up with that data?" And I never can get any kind of response. And I'm fine if I need to stand corrected, I'll stand corrected. But I just don't want to be a slave to implicit bias and putting up cherry picking, statistics that makes a false narrative. And then when you try to stress test it with context, stress test it by citing the slant or the angle of the source citation, then that becomes a problem. And just on Friday, there was an article that came out by a gentleman. His name is Patrick D. Hampton, and he just went all the way in on LeBron, saying, well, he's a black man. He had 4 sons. They took a picture, a nice looking picture of a family. And he went all the way in on LeBron, saying, "You don't speak for me," and that people these fatherless boys who were killed and who were killed by police because the police have to come in with force because and establish order. And I'm looking like, what the hell is this Nia talking about? So um, and I got into a heated discussion with someone on Facebook, and my wife urged me to unfriend him. For obvious reasons I tell you offline. But the thing about it is, what he kept saying was a victim mentality. I said, well, he's saying this is fatherless boys. Hello, I'm a fatherless boy. That picture right there. Can you see it, Rev?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm trying to
that's
get
him.
it so that the whole picture shows, but
And I'm gonna come to what my the premise is of that and why this is happening all of a sudden, because but we got into it on Facebook because he's thinking it's a victim mentality of that it's emotional thinking to think that black men are being targeted by police. I said, but everything that this man wrote was emotional. I mean, if you had to read the letter just to see it, but
right.
but anytime you see this massive upswell of movement, where you have the NBA who boycotted 2 games, just last week,
Playoff
and
game. I mean,
yeah,
that's pretty
it was
major.
that was huge. I mean,
Yeah.
you could say what you will about the bickering on behind closed doors about how come this team didn't tell that team. In that case, Milwaukee didn't tell Orlando, and the bickering about what maybe young fellas may think about LeBron as the head honcho of the league, and because LeBron wanted to leave the bubble, and the Clippers wanted to as well. And then Doc Rivers gave an impassionate, speech that hit home, and he said, "How can we continue to love a country that doesn't love us?" And you heard it repeated on every network that
That
didn't
was a
have any.
really
Yeah,
moving speech too.
it was, and you heard on every network that didn't even have anything to do with sports, and that just goes to tell you how a league that's 75, so close to 80% black, is the first domino to fall, and then you had the NHL following suit. You had the MLB, and both of those sports are as white as American apple pie, and you had the NFL even leaving practices. I mean, so anytime the NBA and particularly I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the WNBA. What those young ladies did with their T-shirts and had 7 shots on the back of their shirts. That
Wow.
was,
Yeah.
man, that was dynamic,
Well, they
and
got ahead of this thing from the start.
they really did. And when you see this type of groundswell of a movement, then here comes the cherry picked token Negroes. I'm going to be frank about it. Okay, here comes the Larry Elders. Here comes the Patrick D. Hamptons, the fellow that Malayna just held up, and the the folks in power, who the powerful elites, always look for these cherry picked black people to they can prop up as puppets to say, "Oh, my master treats me all right. There's no systemic racism. My master treats me real good. I get butter on my biscuits and jelly on the marmalade on the side. These fast Polana are all fruit." So these are the types that are propped up to negate the whole movement and to negate and try to render um, impactless, for lack of a better term, what LeBron was saying, what Dr. Rivers was saying.
They're used
Yes,
to whitewash
to whitewash and
racism and to say, see, it doesn't.
mm-hmm.
So just
And Robert Horry got up there. Robert Horry, who used to play for the Lakers, and that was another impactful and emotional speech that was moving. I mean, he was in tears on the broadcast, on the sports broadcast for the Laker game, and he said that if that cop ends you, then I'm going to have to end him. And that's a sentiment that a lot of black men or black parents are dealing with, at this point, because it's to the point where, okay, how much more should we got to take?
Right.
You know what I mean? Before we end up busting out,
Can I
I'm
butt in
sorry,
here for a minute?
sure, absolutely. The floor is yours. My apologies. talk too
That's
much.
right. So just taking up on your point a little bit, because the conversation isn't just about you, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not just about Black men. You have two young, soon to be young adults
Yes.
in your home, your children, whom you are going to have to, on the one hand, right? So they're hearing a lot of this stuff just from you, depending on, how much of it you share with them. And at the same time, you have to try and instill a sense of hope, right? That they
Yes.
can be an outlier, that they can navigate the system,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because some have,
Yeah,
right?
you still got to coach the
You still
game, no
have,
matter how stacked that other team is. You still
right,
got to coach the game.
right. And I mean, you still got Clarence Thomas is still on the Supreme Court, right?
Mm-hmm.
Herman
He's
Cain,
something else. I'll tell you about both of
but
those guys.
I'm just saying, yeah, but still, he got himself, somehow he got himself educated and worked his way up, right? So you can't negate that part of the story also.
Of rising. Like Ben Carson is another one in that vein. Yes.
Or even your own story,
Mm-hmm.
right? So there are the outliers, right? So it's like, and I think this is the challenge that we're having, getting through to people who don't get white privilege, right? And,
Yes.
and so then you start out trying to have a conversation about privilege. And if you have someone who is resistant to that, you're going to get nowhere with white fragility.
That is very true.
Right?
Or centering.
So
They take a whole conversation and then center it on themselves, and make it about their individual character. But continue, Rev. I'm sorry.
I guess what I'm getting at is, I'm wondering if, and I'm kind of thinking out loud here, is it even important to try and win people over in this way? Right? I mean, are there enough people in the coalition now to where we can start to build policy? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So to get out of okay, look, all right, we're just going to have to, even though I don't get it, we're just going to have to agree to disagree. And
yes.
So you go back to your folks over there.
In your silo.
And I'm going to go over here with my folks.
And
we'll just, we're going to go work up our policies, because at some point we're going to have to be able to govern when all this is over, and hopefully it's going to be over sooner rather than later. Right. So the one, you and I have talked about this, the one good thing, if you can say this even, is that this conversation that has been held in back rooms or around kitchen tables, on holidays, right, in safe places, white places.
Yes.
Right. That that now we know what everybody's thinking, really. All right. So by now, I think the conversation. So folks have those who've been interested in learning have watched 13th.
Yep.
Read, Robin DiAngelo and Menachem, and they've read. Is it Ta-Nehisi Coates?
Ta-Nehisi Coates, yes.
Ta-Nehisi Coates.
Yeah.
So they're read up along with Baldwin and Du Bois and Dr. King too.
Yeah.
Dr. King was no lightweight.
Not at all.
And I keep, the thing that I keep wondering is, and this is where we're going to need a coalition or a voice to pick up the work that because Dr. King recognized that the only way out of this is through economic stability.
Yes.
For Black Americans and for whites.
Right.
right? The two of them have, everybody needs to be raised.
Yes.
Right. So I don't know how we're going to do that, but I'm just wondering if we might just be talking ourselves into an echo chamber, not the three of us, but
No, I understand you.
on media.
Yes.
Right. And maybe it's just time to say, it's time. Let's stop the chatter. Let's, let's start addressing some things and see. Right. So let's put up a policy and let's see who we got.
Yes.
And let's see how many, conservatives we can win over. Right. So the one thing that's always puzzled me is why the ACA, the Affordable Care Act, why business never embraced that. To me, it was like, oh, I get to offload this human resources headache to the government. Sign me up.
Yeah.
Right. But I think there was a distrust that they wouldn't still get stuck paying for it. Maybe taxation, that they weren't going to offload the cost.
That's true. Yeah.
Which I think was a legitimate concern, but but we still haven't found out whether that market. We never got to build the entire national market, which is what it was designed to be.
The market base, yes.
Right. So I'm just thinking about race relations in this same way. And Biden has been in the game a long time. Maybe he's going to be able to pull some stuff. I have to think he's got legislation in his back pocket. Ironically, if Trump was motivated to do it, he could twist everybody's arm and make him do it.
Well, very much so.
I just don't think he even thinks that way, that is the heartbreaker of the whole thing. This is what Doc Rivers is speaking to. Right. So, I mean, I don't know about you, but I was here's a guy who's, my age, maybe a few years older.
Yes.
Right. And kind of losing it. Right. And a man in his own power. Right. A rich man. Right.
And his dad was a cop.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
I did not know that. See,
and his dad was a cop in the most turbulent time, one of the most turbulent times in this country's history during the 50s and 60s.
Well, I'm just curious what you guys think about that. I mean, do you feel like we still need to keep the conversation going to find our way through this? I mean, is it too early to say, all right, let's roll up our sleeves and get out our pencils?
Well, I still think we can do both. It probably would, the ratio would probably end up changing where from a 100% discussion model to something like a 75-25 split or 70-30, and then you work your way incrementally. Right. But that depends on where we are.
So the nerds will take their notepads and go to the back of the room and
there you have it. Because I can crunch numbers all day, statistics all day, come up with standard deviations all day, but you just got to have a type of framework to where those types of the statistics are housed, and they can start, basically taking on a life of its own within that ecosystem.
So let me ask you this. Is there so for instance, one of the things that I hear, and I got to tell you, it kind of surprises me still, is that, I think white people are being discriminated against right now. Right? This kind of started back 20 years ago with the anti-affirmative action. Remember when they wanted to dismantle affirmative action?
Yeah.
We now had parity. So is there any data out there that would support that? Because I have seen none.
Any data that supports
this idea of
white people being discriminated against?
Yes, like that. Yes, exactly.
I do know with regard to affirmative action, there was an article in Time magazine in 1991 that stated that the greatest benefactors were white women. So yeah, you can split the atom and say, well, okay, you mentioned white people, there's a preface of your question, but then white woman can come, well, I'm white woman, but yeah, the common denominator is still white, right?
Right.
So but you still get to benefit from an affirmative action legislation that was intended for for black people at one point.
Well,
And the
particularly if
interesting
you're married
thing,
to a white woman.
I'm sorry.
You're a white, particularly if you're a white man married to a white woman.
Absolutely, so the white man is the architect of a discriminatory system, and a white woman is the heiress to it. So you have both housed in the same roof. And the thing that was so skillful is that when the civil rights legislation was passed in '64, the voting rights legislation was passed in '65. If looking at the verbiage of that legislation, it made it skillful where it allowed a little wiggle room for white women to go, okay, I'm here and I can get the same provisions. That
Right,
was
because they
mhm.
included sex into that amendment.
Bingo.
Right. I think that
Hmm.
was on the 13th where they talked about that.
Yes,
Where
absolutely.
the Southern, the Dixiecrats
Hmm.
thought they could use that to kill the bill.
And, and you know what's and you know what's also interesting about that piece, Rev, is that we're talking 1964 to 1965. So let's see if my math is right. We'll go 117 years prior to the civil rights legislation. We're talking 1848 in Seneca Falls, New York. Okay, you had Susan B. Anthony, you had Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Who was the person that they turned to speak on their behalf and to galvanize women's suffrage? One of our great black minds, Frederick Douglass.
Right.
And the interesting thing is, at that Seneca Falls convention, it was all white women. He was the only black man there, and there were no black women anywhere. They weren't invited. They weren't invited. So then, when they came time to do the march in Washington, okay, where they had the different state delegates, and the women were marching. The black women who were present, I forget their names often. I don't think it was Mary McLeod Bethune, but I look that up. But the black women who were fighting for suffrage right alongside the white women, they got pretty nasty and said, "Y'all got to march in the back." And even Elizabeth Cady Stanton, if you look up her commentary about why does a Negro get the right to vote before I do, her racial demons started coming to the forefront as well. So it's a ugly history, with that. And I'm gonna be honest. This is what I'm just laying my soul bare. This is what bothers me when black people generally are asked to carry the water for other special interest groups.
Right.
Because we're carrying the water while we're dehydrated ourselves,
Right.
and we don't get to drink from it. We're not invited to drink from it, but we have to carry it. Because no sooner when something happens that affects a special interest group, whether it be a Latinx individual, whether it be a woman, who was like either raped, or then you hear like the believe women kind of thing. The first folks, that group of people they turn to is like, all right, black people, like we're right along with you. We have the same fight. I said, no, our fight as black people is against the system. You white woman, your fight is with your man. Those are two different things altogether. And so that's just that's what kind of bothers me about it, because we would be the backbone to every other special interest group, but then when it's time for us to eat, we're forgotten about. So it's like, you ever go to a buffet and you pouring your food on a table, and here come all the other forks over your shoulder going, you know, and you know,
it's almost like they're standing on the shoulders that your movement has fought for.
absolutely.
You just described dinner table at my house.
You see, but we're talking about a model and a habitual behavior from 1848 Seneca Falls Convention to the 1960s. Okay, and then you can even go prior to that. Okay, when in World War II, when the men went off to war, and what was the you know who I'm talking about, the caricature? What's her name?
Rosie the Riveter.
There you go, Rosie the Riveter. And so that was the spirit behind women entering the workforce. But you know who was behind that? The silent hand was behind that? The Rockefellers were. And the reason why the Rockefellers were financiers. So the Rockefellers, as bright as they were, they knew that there was more money to be made if there are more people into the workforce. So if you only have half the population in the workforce, you can only tax half the population. You know, by adding women into the workforce, now you get double the taxation. You see, so like it's all comes back. You follow that money trail, all comes right back to it, and that's why they supported it.
Yeah. Oh wow.
Yeah.
Well, I was looking up Black suffragette women and found an article on The Guardian. There's a picture.
Does Ida B. Wells, or is that it? If my eyesight's correctly?
It doesn't say under that image.
Okay.
And I haven't read the whole article yet, but
I have a feeling it might be Ida B. Wells.
Yeah,
I could be
think
wrong.
so.
Yeah, Ida B. Wells. Yeah, it was like we had a whole in Chicago. We had projects named after her.
And then Mary Church Terrell, you mentioned, former.
I didn't mention her, but I thought I got her mixed up with Mary McLeod Bethune.
Oh, right, that's who you mentioned. I'm looking for these names, but this is on theguardian.com.
Okay.
If anybody wants to look it up.
Sure.
I like to try to mention the actual names of the people who have been forgotten or pushed aside from history, so that we can bring them back into the story, because that's important.
And everybody knows who Susan B. Anthony is, but not many people may have heard of Elizabeth Cady Stanton, you know, and who worked right alongside her.
Yeah. And when I was studying women's rhetoric and the women's movement when I was in college, which was a few years ago now, we did talk about how the movement for just equality movements for Black people and for the suffragettes or suffragists were together, and then they started getting, well, you know, we'll get further along and then we'll bring you along, or let us do it just for us. And there was a split. It was one movement at one point where everybody was trying to get raised up, and
the white women of that day and contemporarily speaking were smart enough to know that from an accounting standpoint, that the credit of their race outweighs the debt of their gender. And so that's why because there's no accident for those who are out there, you can look this up, that during this past election in 2016, that 63% of white women voted for Donald Trump. And this was after he said, grab him by the VJ, you know what I mean? And he said, you know, all these other misogynistic things about his daughter and things like that. But even like with Me Too was, I forgot the girl's name, it slips my mind. But Me Too was started by a Black girl. Okay. And then white women took that and ran with it. But then you turn around and to the tune of 63%, you vote this man in office? You know, I mean, and that's crazy, you know, so. I mean, so you have that, you know, constant, like we're left behind kind of a deal. But that's the reason why they knew that, you know, they could get further ahead by voting for the patriarchy, voting for their whiteness as opposed to their gender. And
I think
therein lies the divide.
you said it so well when you said the credit versus the debt, right?
Mm-hmm.
So really it all comes down to making money, like you pointed at the Rockefellers, and
Mm-hmm.
why were slaves imported into America? To make money.
Absolutely, is
And
making money and to maintain power, as a ruling class, over
right.
the exploited class.
Yeah.
I mean,
So really that is
yeah, as
that the
long as that doesn't change hands, I mean, we're gonna continue to have these discussions. We're gonna continue to see on our TV, what's happening, it's like a cyclical basis, you know.
it was Tarana Burke who was the founder of the
That's her
Me Too
name.
movement. I looked her
Yeah.
up just so we could say that. Whose phone is that? Let's answer.
Oh,
Who's calling?
that's a house phone.
Okay. Maybe it's somebody important calling.
Somebody probably is saying, well, one day when this show gets sophisticated, we'll say, there's a caller on the line, and
That's
somebody goes,
right.
Salaam, I disagree with you.
First time caller, long time listener.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we had started talking about like what actions we can take,
Mm-hmm.
stepping into living as if things are actually
Bless you.
in the process of change. And one friend of mine told me that her church in her community was starting to work with the police to offer meditation courses, because yeah, they've shown that if they can just learn to slow down, which is something that Resma talks about in My Grandmother's Hands, it helps slow down trauma responses and triggers if people feel centered and calm.
Absolutely.
And stable. Yeah. So, I mean, anybody who's watching or listening can go out and reach out to their local police department and say, do you have this program and how can I help you set it up?
And shout out to Jim Lockhart. I mean, a longtime friend of yours, Rev. I mean, like, there's a guy that crossed over from law enforcement, and had his awakening, and then and his art bended, evolutionary wise, over to science of mind. So.
Well, and I forgot to tell you that he'd love to come on with us.
Okay.
Very good.
That'd be good. That'd be good.
August 24th, but then things got away from me and.
Understood.
Yeah.
At least we know he's there. So, because I love to hear his perspective, just out of curiosity, just in person, So.
Yeah. What are some other things that you would like to see people doing? We had mentioned before getting involved in neighborhood councils, getting involved in local government. On the Nextdoor app, people have been promoting Black-owned businesses in the neighborhoods and saying, support them in this difficult time.
Sure. Yeah.
Reverend Mike, did you have any thoughts in mind when you started talking about, let's not talk anymore, let's not talk about it, let's be about it?
Well, I don't know enough about how legislation and stuff is done. So I would think that part of it could be basic stuff like ensuring that, I'd like to find ways to integrate our better neighborhoods. Like all of our rentals, all of our neighborhoods have rental homes in them, right? So how can we get lower income Black families into homes in better neighborhoods?
Yeah. So
that I don't know if that makes a difference or not, but it seems to me that we've got to come out of our little enclaves, whether we've gone there to get away from it all or because we're stuck where we're stuck, right? So that we can find ways to live with each other, not just visit.
Mhm.
Maybe that's too big. Maybe that's too big a thing. I don't know, but
I mean, it's like once upon a day they had sundown towns. Like you were a maid or a worker, you were fine to work here, but then you had to head out of town before the sun went down. So, but
Hmm.
it's interesting because we like, and I don't have an answer to be honest, but I could just make the observation, right? Um, I know like, having black families welcome in better neighborhoods is a start, and even so, while at the same time, because we could walk and chew gum, both two things could be true. At the same time, what things that we can do in the hood, that would have those neighborhoods reverse course so they're not so economically depressed.
right.
You know what I mean? So you have like, do they have access to quality food? Do they have access to clean water? How is the housing component? What's the tax levy? For those properties in neighborhood comparison? To a white neighborhood or what have you. And like I say, I don't have the answer for that, but and it has to be a way where both of what Reverend Mike mentioned and this can both be true, where everyone can be move about freely without having. We got to break down these damn housing covenants that are still being silently enforced, and it's how we do it. It's a complex thing. Like it's a ball of yarn, and what we're doing, the three of us, is we're pulling you know, and there's a pile of yarn that's sitting over there that someone can knit a sweater off of, but we still haven't gotten to the end of that ball. That
Right.
ball is still there, so that's pretty much where we are, and it'll take some. I have to do some homework on that to really like
Here's some
hone
simple.
in on that.
Here's some simple things, right? So
Hmm.
if you or a friend is an educator, we can buy them books with people of color as protagonists,
Hmm.
uh, uh, and of course, Black history books around Black history. Uh,
Or legal
have,
rights is as well.
yes, pushing our police departments to make sure they have body cameras.
Hmm.
Um,
Kenosha.
yeah, so yeah,
And
exactly.
the sheriff's department in LA, that's for
Mm.
y'all.
To make
I
sure
mean,
that
two departments that didn't have cameras,
yeah,
and these are
Wow.
two recent shootings.
yeah. So
I'm sorry.
Wow.
well, I'm just these are kind of those are just kind of simple things that people can do just by themselves.
Absolutely.
Donate to anti-white supremacy groups like we give to the United Negro College Fund and
Hmm.
NAACP.
Urban
Are you
League.
playing with
You know.
something on your desk again, Rev? There's a weird, yeah, that.
Does that bother
Don't
you?
don't do that. It's probably bothering anybody who's bothered to watch so
This is
far.
what talking about what a black person having to explain white privilege to a white person.
That's what it sounds like. That's worse than like the
So
teacher in
Charlie
Charlie
Brown's grandmother.
Brown.
Nails on a chalkboard.
So, in talking about getting quality food into neighborhoods that, they're in a food desert and there's like
Hmm.
one supermarket with fresh food for every so many thousands of people, it's ridiculous.
Right.
There is an organization in LA called SÜPRMARKT, and it's spelled like that, SUPRMARKT.
Okay.
And they bring organic produce, and it's started by an African American woman. And you bring a bag, and they help people have access to really good quality fruits and vegetables.
Yes.
And if you follow them on social media, you can find out where their next location is. So it's
Okay.
not like a permanent solution, but like the next one, it looks
It's a
like
start.
Leimert Park.
Leimert Park, yes.
Yeah, and it says until the lockdown ends. We're not holding markets, but are filling pickup and delivery orders each week.
Mm-hmm.
So SÜPRMARKT LA /store to place your order. So, I mean,
Okay.
that's for people in LA who otherwise would have to take a bus or two to get to a supermarket and then try to take it back. And, otherwise it's just fast food or convenience stores, liquor stores in the area.
Yeah, and speaking of taking buses, I mean, there's no accident that you can only take the buses around here so far, before it's going to stop to a certain point. But then you have all these residential homes north of that of the main street, So yeah, so there you have it. So it's just looking at the way things are. And it's no accident. Like if we say that, hey, let's all come together, but are we really together when as soon as you drive in, your gated community is going like this?
Right.
Okay, are we really together at that point? I mean, like
saying that, I was thinking about, particularly in suburban areas, how none of us really know our neighbors anyway, regardless of race.
Very true. Yes.
Right? We drive into our garages with the automatic door opener, and the door goes down, and we go into the house, and we might see folks when we take out the garbage.
You just might, and
which is really quality time, of course.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and for men, but it's it's interesting.
It seems to me that kids are the best mixers in the neighborhood.
Yeah,
because they don't. I mean, like they only know what's being taught, right? I mean, and consider that shooter in Kenosha, 17. That's the same age as our son, and you put that in perspective. Okay, who taught this kid? So I heard that he got the gun from somebody, a friend of his or something, but supposedly the mom had drove him across state line to drop him off. And like we hear things, you would think that things like would get better.
A weapon?
Exactly. And you would think that things would get better as every passing generation, but somebody taught these folks. I mean, like Dylan Roof was a millennial. And then if you look at like the Little Rock Nine, and I forgot the young black girl, she was 5 years old, and she had a book bag. She was surrounded by all these National Guardsmen. But then, back to my earlier point, you had white women that were behind her saying, nigger, go home. You're not welcome here. We keeping our schools white. We're for statehood. We're for this, that, and the other. There's a book that's out called Mothers of Massive Resistance. And it details explicitly the role that white women have in upholding a racialized society that goes very unspoken. I mean, because they're the ones who are the behavioral scientists who are suspending black kids at a rate that's umpteen times more than white kids. They're the ones who's determining the race of a kid as a midwife. They're the ones who are circulating petitions in the neighborhood and working the PTAs, and they're the ones who are advancing in changes. See, looking at these historical pictures of school integration, you see all those June Cleaver housewives standing right behind them protesting integration. And that's what is part and parcel. What I had to my point earlier that I had issue. Okay, you're double dipping. Now you're aligning yourselves with as women's suffrage with the plight of black people, but at the same time, you're voting to keep those racial lines of demarcation emboldened. You're not even erasing them in the finest, in the finest, slightest bit. I mean, so it's a new, very nuanced, and it's a very layered, kind of a complex thing, and it's gonna take a while. So we just gotta like be patient with it, and we don't have to get ahead of ourselves. So what we're doing here is fine. We just have to like just continue to unravel stuff, and then now you got all the pieces of this 500-piece puzzle Now you start putting it together. You know what I'm saying? So
yeah.
You know,
I was mentioning, oh, go ahead, Rev. I was mentioning to Salaam before we started recording that I watched back the Kimberly Jones video where she talks about the history of Black people in America as playing Monopoly for
yes.
400 years. You're not even allowed to play. And then for 50 years, they let you play, but every now and then they say, nope, that's all mine and take it all back.
Yeah.
And so how can, at this point, if somebody says, okay, go ahead, you can play, how can we win? Because there's structures in place. We can never really play equally. And she mentioned the communities of Rosewood and in Tulsa, the Black Wall Street, and said when we do get self-sufficient and create communities where we're just looking after ourselves, people come in and destroy them. And I had to look up Tulsa and Rosewood to see what she was talking about because I don't remember ever hearing of them.
Pardon me, Malayna. I'm sorry. I'm gonna let you finish. Adding in another one. You don't even have to go back that far. Just go back 35 years ago to Philadelphia, 1985. Look up "Move" in Philadelphia, and look that up. I won't spoil it for you, but that was very recent. I was in third grade when that happened, and so remember seeing it on the news. Yes.
So, I mean, all of these things are bits of history. It's pieces of the puzzle that not, the privileged people who don't have to pay attention and haven't, it hasn't been shared with, don't know. So I didn't know. And when I saw it, I thought, why just leave people alone? They're self-sufficient. They're not bothering you. They're, but it's a horrible aspect of, power and the sense of entitlement that comes with that power. And, I don't know. I keep learning things now that I'm really focusing on learning more so that I can educate myself and have these conversations.
Right.
And it's hard to see these things pop up that I didn't know and how terrible they are.
Yes.
And then try to figure out how to come from where we are now and start dismantling and just it's like rewiring. They say rewiring the brain, you have to sort of disconnect from a repeated thought and start reconnecting and building those synapses to new ideas. And we have to do that with so many ideas if we're thinking of a societal brain.
Yeah.
And not everybody wants to make the effort of disconnecting a synapse from an old thought and connecting to a new thought. That may be too scary for them, or
especially if they're trying to lose something.
Yes.
But I mean, because that's how power works. I mean, because power works where you have to be the victor at all times and at all costs by all means. And even if a people is humbled or humiliated or downtrodden or just your hands in their pocket, just kicking a can up the road or this kind of thing. Nope, it doesn't matter, because even though they're not bothering you, you still have to come and exert power. Power doesn't recognize, power doesn't emote. Power doesn't recognize sadness. It doesn't recognize despair. It just recognizes conquest. And that's just what it does.
It's bullying. It's like a whole race.
And then if you dare raise up, then all of a sudden it's like, well, how dare you? Like you say, so then the wrath of the system just comes at you. Then the wrath of the perception of the supporters of that system come at you. Kind of absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, like the Reverend said, the kids, if we don't teach them something else, kids play together. They don't care.
They do.
And what kids see, they know that they can become. So having more stories, having more books that show the heroes, the outliers, like you said,
Yes.
and making sure there is more content available online and on a lot of the media channels of like, there's one on HBO called Lovecraft Country. I just heard about.
I
I've been
heard
seeing.
about that's the name. I was trying to tell my wife about it, and I
Okay.
haven't got a chance to watch it. We have the HBO Max, but maybe I get a chance to watch it. But
Yeah, I
they
haven't seen
did,
it yet either.
yeah. They I just saw what was trending, and they
Mm,
showed a boy that was wearing the exact same color and design of a shirt and tie, and they
mm.
said that ghost. He said that he was something about he didn't want to go away out of town because he wasn't going to have a good time. That ghost was Emmett Till before he went down south, and
Wow.
it sent chills up my spine really because
It's
I wrote my
supernatural horror,
yes I
but
wrote
it's
the yeah I wrote used to ride the bus on 63rd Street going past this a block from where he lived every single day when I went to high school, and the house is still there. And it's known as the Emmett Till house. I showed it to my kids when I took them back last time to Chicago, but
mhm.
it looked like it's vacant and it needs to be like preserved or something like that. But
Yeah, it should
yeah,
be.
I don't know if they registered as a landmark in Chicago or not, but it's still standing.
Well, that's good. But yeah, I mean, just the idea of this television show, it's actually focused from the perspective of Black Americans in the 50s and 60s. And then it's also sci-fi and horror. So
Hmm.
it appeals to a wider audience, but gives
Yes.
kind of another connection that you can make and another way to see the stories without overtly saying, here, study this, or here,
Right.
Right.
it's like, oh, sci-fi and horror and it's
Hmm.
Lovecraft, and come in and watch this. And then you
Yeah.
see it's focused from a different perspective of storytelling than we're usually seeing in
Hmm.
mainstream media. And so these are all good things that if we champion them and let people know that it's there and invite them into our conversation, and hopefully they get inspired and say, I'm going to go do whatever they're inspired to do. That, I mean, that's
Yeah.
my hope for these conversations.
Yeah.
And when opportunities arise, we can jump on them.
Yeah, absolutely. At the same time, so our work has just begun.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not a job that will finish quickly. I don't
Right.
think. It's pretty big. It's a pretty
Yeah.
big thing. Yeah. So we've done about an hour now, I think.
All right.
So we should wrap it up. Are there any closing ministerial, spiritual, directorish thoughts you have to
Well, I would just,
out?
if you're someone watching this, I would just ask you to just, rather than get overwhelmed by what's going on out there and the real tragedy that's going on, is, there is something to be said for opening, keeping our heart open, keeping our mind open, and learning as much as we can, uh, and to say and to pray.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we can all at least do that.
Yes.
And when we have those opportunities to step up uh, and be the change, we can do that. Whether it's sticking up for someone at the supermarket or writing a letter um, to a representative, either local, state, or even national.
Or even
So,
calling out when we hear in conversation and
Yeah.
just stopping people for a minute and say, let me stop you there.
Right.
that's not
I'm
cool.
not comfortable
Right.
with that, or
Yeah.
something, just
Hmm.
to bring awareness. I mean, those are things we can do.
Right.
All right. So thank you, Salaam. Before we go, what does it say on your shirt? You usually
Oh.
educate with your T-shirts. So
Oh, sure. That's my namesake. That's written in Arabic, my salam. Yeah.
well, very
From left to we read from left to right.
okay.
Arabics read from right to left. So it starts from from I'm looking at the camera. So from here, going here. So that's what it is. So
Very cool.
Sin Alif Lam Alif Mim. So those are the characters in Arabic.
Wow, that is cool. Thank you for sharing that with us, and thank you, Reverend Mike.
That's my namesake. So
beautiful. And thanks.
Well, always it's good to see you. So
great to see you both. It was another good one as well. So hopefully everyone enjoys their holiday weekend coming up. So
Labor Day. Oh
yeah.
Speaking of which, Labor Day, I have a book release coming out.
That's right.
Oh, look at that.
The book is actually done.
Look at that.
Yeah.
You can find it on Amazon right now if you have time.
I get my signed copy.
Yeah. And I love the subtitle, Finding a God That Works, because it has that kind of double entendre of like a working person's God, a God that working people can relate to. Right. So well done, Rev. And I'm waiting for my copies to arrive for Amazon to deliver. Anyway.
Yeah, I'll get on that myself. Exactly that.
All right, you guys.
All right.
Have a great
rest. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you and take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.